This is Logical Logistics, where we cover shipping, supply chain, logistics, and everything in between. Welcome to the show. All right, welcome to the latest episode of Logical Logistics, and today we're going to have a little fun, a little unusual, but it will be fun and interesting nevertheless. We have Michael Wagner from Bradenton, Florida, and Michael owns and runs the Little Giant Brewery in Bradenton. Michael, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good, Joe. I'm ready for fun.
All right, sounds good. So, so obviously, the reason I'm having you on is you have a small business and you're running a brewery. So obviously, there's going to be logistics involved. But before we go into that, I'd like to ask you a little bit about yourself. Can you give us a little background?
Sure. Been in the brewing sector for about 15 plus years. Always with the mind that I would start my own brewery. In the time that I've been in the industry, I've worked with several really awesome people and awesome breweries. Gone to brewing school, the World Brewing Academy and the Siebel Institute up in Chicago, and the Doman's Academy just outside of Munich. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
How was that? Not to interrupt.
That was great.
Yeah.
Luckily for me, the brewmaster that I kind of apprenticed under as an assistant brewer basically taught me as best as anyone could as far as brewing techniques, traditional and technological and everything else. But then when you go to Germany and learn from the Germans, you know, they hammer it all home. So that was great. As far as my career, I mean, it's taken me from Florida to Chicago to the Turks and Caicos Islands to Indiana, you know, different places, which is really great. You meet a lot of great people in this industry, and you get to see how people conduct the business successfully. I mean, we're kind of in a boom in breweries, mostly because of the people who laid the groundwork, you know, 20, 25 years ago. There's a lot of breweries right now reaching their 20 and 25th anniversaries, and they're doing great. And there's reason, because they know how to run the business as well and make really good beer. So, I love to be in the industry, and it's great that I get to live the dream down here in Florida, Bradenton. Weather's pretty great year round. Gets a little hot in the summer, but yeah, it's a good place to be. So
have you specifically just have a expertise in beer, or have you brewed other types of beverages?
Mostly, beer is my love. But
right.
I worked with a winery when I was in Indianapolis, helping some friends kind of lay the groundwork for their brewery. Easily Winery is who I worked for, and when I was with them, you know, brewed vinted a lot of different styles of wine, and even some honey wine, mead, things like that. So that kind of gave me a more well-rounded perspective on equipment, logistics, and everything else, sourcing materials and different things. And if you pay attention to the craft brewing scene these days, there's a lot of crossover between industries. A lot of breweries are either starting their own distilleries as well as their breweries, or using grape must to make some really funky, interesting, exotic beers. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a wide open perspective you could have. It used to be like I was trained to make really solid traditional beers, which is great. That base will always be with me, and I love the great European styles of beer. But it's also like this wide open creativity that we have that are just, you know, it's just part of the palette that we have to paint with these days. So any kind of crossover into the other industries is great. Also, people love their craft sodas and their root beer. I've got people in my family who don't drink beer, so, you know, I've got to provide for them too. So we've got some recipes for cream sodas and root beer and all that good stuff too. So
it sounds like one of the upsides of this, and there seems to be quite a bit, one being that you get to live in Florida, but you get to be quite creative. You act like an artist. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a kind of I think that's what kind of suits my personality is I get to blend technological and engineering principles and biochemistry with the creativity of the ingredients at our disposal. So you get to have fun and also crank out some really good, solid, traditional, flawless beers. So,
Well, I really like the name of the company, Little Giant. Can you give me a little background why you named your brewery Little Giant Brewery?
well, Little Giant, my connection with it is I went to my undergraduate degree in English and in literature is from Wabash College in Crawfordsville, Indiana, a small liberal arts all-male college, one of only a couple left in the United States. But I thought it was really hokey when I first started checking the college out, but they're originally called the Cavemen way back in the old days, but then I think in the 40s or 50s, they changed the name to the Little Giants. And it always stuck. When we were in college, I always said, it was when I was in college in the early 90s, it was kind of like just the first beginnings of like a national craft beer microbrewery movement. And we always, I was at an all-male college, so all we did was basically hammer the academics, play some sports, and drink a lot of good beer. So we sat around and we're like, someday there's got to be a Little Giant Brewery. So I guess I'm the one to do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, if I remember correctly with my infinite trivia knowledge, Wabash has that big rivalry with DePaul University in Indiana, correct?
Right. Yeah. They call it the biggest little football game in college football. It's the battle for the Monon Bell. It happens every year. They switch off. DePaul University and Wabash are about 20 some miles apart from each other, so it's kind of an easy road trip. But 1 weekend a year, in the middle of November, we always battle for the bell for I think 119 consecutive meetings.
Okay.
So, yeah, they've been playing the Monon Bell for a long time. So, the DePaul Tigers, but they're affectionately known by the Little Giants as the DePaul Swallows.
Okay.
That's a whole different. That's a whole different.
That's a whole different topic for another podcast. So,
yeah.
You mentioned you did mention logistics, and that's
Sure.
that's the gist of this show. I wanted to go into what entails your business. What do you need as far as store? Let's start with storage. So, what do you need to?
Sure. Well, function because we're beer making driven primarily by agriculture with the malted barley, the hops. You have to be aware of not only where your ingredients are coming from, but how they're stored on the way before they even get here, how they're shipped, and then once they get here, we definitely in Florida have the heat factor, and those ingredients, they're affected by that. So you want to have not only a really, really functional working space because you're going through so many raw materials so quickly, but also that they're going to be either temperature controlled. You want to keep it's like hops. You need to keep them the best way to keep them is in a deep freeze until you use them, just to preserve all those good little things that we need in there. And then with the malted barley, a lot of varieties, if they're over 80 degrees in their storage temperature, there's these little beetles that come out, little malt beetles. So they kind of destroy your grain. Yeah. They're like, so things like that, and that's big. And then, that's just on the front end of things. After you brew the beer, obviously cold storage for the finished product in the bottles, kegs, or cans, however you're doing it. And then how it's shipped out to the consumers through your distributors. In Florida, where they have a 3-tiered distribution system. So whoever brews the beer can't directly distribute it to a retailer like a bar or a liquor store. So we have to have that third party, and we always strive to have the product remain cold from the time it leaves here to the time it gets into somebody's hand in their house. So, yeah, that's another consideration.
Okay.
For sure.
So there's a few things I wanted to touch on. You brought up a lot of great information there. First of all, you're just right off the bat, you have to be quite dependent on air conditioning, correct?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, down here especially,
I
for
just,
sure.
I just listened to, I believe it was the Freakonomics
Hmm.
podcast, and one of the guests argued that air conditioning is one of the top five greatest inventions in our lifetime. And
Hmm.
he made quite a strong argument, especially for companies like yours in the South, because
Hmm.
without air conditioning, the South's economy wouldn't be able to grow the way it has. But
Oh no, not at all.
so then you brought up, and then we're going to go more into how you ship your material
Hmm.
in and out. But you mentioned that you can't directly ship out. But when I see larger breweries with their giant trucks every day, so how do you differ
Hmm.
from that? How do they get away with it, and then you aren't able to?
Well, it's there's federal laws and then there's state laws, and the distribution laws in the United States are governed on a state level.
Okay.
So in, let's say, Indiana, for instance, they're fighting to raise the limit on barrelage, which when we talk about volume produced, it's in U.S. liquid barrels, which is 31 gallons.
Yeah.
So let's say a brewery like Triton Brewery in just outside Indianapolis, they brew 5,000 barrels a year. They're under a cap in Indiana where they could self-distribute if they want. Now, over 30,000 barrels, they would have to use a distributor. Well, there's a couple of breweries, Three Floyds, Sun King, that are right there on that 30,000 barrel mark, and they've put together a logistics system on their own to self-distribute. So they want to petition the legislature in that state to raise the barrel limit for them to self-distribute. Down here, we don't even, not even a factor. We can't, as far as on the road transfers, we can't do it, so that's not something that we can deal with. But yeah, it's a state by state thing. And then there's other games, or not, I shouldn't say games, but there's other legal ways that breweries kind of self-distribute in their own way, which is kind of through controlling interests in the distributors themselves. So generally, like, we could, like, as a small brewery, I can't have an ownership and a distributorship, but that's not to say that we couldn't have other partners or other people that we know start a small, tiny little distributorship and be able to get our beers out there. But that's, again, when you, like you said, logistics,
Yeah.
that's really tough for small businesses to not only produce a quality product, but once you start getting tires on the road, that's a whole different ballgame. So yeah, it's interesting though. I mean, we do have options within the rules that guide all of us in each state, but it's just a matter of, can you do it? Do we want to run 5 trucks on the road every day transporting our beer while we're just struggling to start up our business, or
Right.
do
Yeah, that's a lot of
run full
overhead.
production stream?
So
Yeah, yeah,
you
exactly.
mentioned, so the 30 barrel rule applies in Indiana, but you
Yeah,
stated
38,000. Yeah,
there isn't a rule in Florida. I'm just because when you think of Florida,
right,
you think of that big amusement park in Tampa that's named after a beer. Um,
right.
yeah. So what do they do, and why can't you do that? I mean, is there a differentiation there, or
Yeah.
okay?
Well, again, it goes state by state. It's just, it's a big question, and it's something every year. Now that we've had the rise of the microbreweries, like we have, I mean, we have more breweries now finally than we've ever had in this country, dating back to like the late 1800s. We finally surpassed this like 2,400 brewery mark, which is amazing. But as we've done that, there's also, let's face it, and this is all logistics. The distributors, beer distributors, they want to keep their jobs, for one thing. So they legislate or lobby to, kind of keep a clamp on smaller breweries. They know somebody, some of the small brewers know we're not, more than likely not going to be able to ship our own beers and be willing to start or be involved with a small distributor. So they kind of make sure that the laws kind of tilt in their favor so that they'll always have jobs and that they'll always be needed. Generally, that argument goes under in Florida. I'll just take a step back. Our governor in Florida he says, we're open for business. Well, unless you're in the beer industry, because they put clamps on us every chance they get.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And generally, one of the major arguments in Florida when we try to kind of open up the distribution a little bit, like make it a little more flexible for us, there's a social component to it that that if people have direct access to breweries and alcohol manufacturers, there'll be more alcoholism and alcohol abuse. And they argue that by having the third tier, it allows alcohol abuse to be controlled a little bit more.
Right.
I don't know where the science comes from behind that, but that's an argument. So it's like, okay, well, we do what we can. We do what we can for sure. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So on the logistics end, how do you get your raw materials and equipment into your brewery?
Well, equipment, and I did want to touch on that as far as logistics go, because that's a big one. But as far as the raw materials go, also in Florida, there's always high shipping costs coming down here. Most of our raw materials, we don't grow barley in Florida. It just is almost until they mess with the genome on the barley. You're not going to be growing a cold weather crop down here. So everything that we get from maltsters and co-ops that are North Dakota, Minnesota, Idaho, up in that region. So you're talking about a lot of Canada sometimes. So you're talking about a lot of road miles. And one of the problems in Florida is, it's not a problem, it just drives up the cost, is, traditionally trucks come loaded on the way down to Florida, but they leave empty because we don't have a really large manufacturing commerce base down here. So it kind of drives up our costs a little bit. Same thing with the hop. Most of the hops that we use either come from the Pacific Northwest or they come from Europe. So those things are shipped over on boats or they're shipped down here from the Pacific Northwest on 18-wheelers. So, and that, again, interstate, we have got beautiful weather. Nothing slows us down here. But let's say in the middle of the winter and you've got one of your massive northwest cold fronts coming through up north and it slows everything down up there, well then guess what? Then it's going to slow down the trucks coming here to the peninsula to deliver our goods. So yeah. I mean, those are big issues for sure. As far as the equipment goes, and that's a huge one. Most breweries now are either ordering and receiving big equipment. People, if you walk by a small brewery, you see it's a pretty significant amount of stainless steel in there, and that all comes on trucks too. So that is always incredibly interesting and I've worked with different breweries where we've upgraded or installed new equipment, and getting that equipment, you're paying a lot of money for 304 stainless, and you really want it to be shipped without any scratches or dents. You're paying a lot of money for this stuff. So it's always interesting to see how the shipping companies cradle the different equipment, and then once it gets here, that's always one of the, you'll always see pictures on the internet from breweries who are starting up or adding equipment. It's always a big day when the truck rolls in with your 80 barrel fermenter that,
if it's damaged.
Well, yeah, I mean, and then you have to get it all, you get it out of the cradle and then into position in the brewery. So you're using a lot of equipment, block and tackle and everything else to get it off of there safely and without any scratches or dents. Because nothing, kind of like getting a new car, and if you drive it off the lot and you get a scratch in the first parking lot that you park in, yeah, it's the same kind of thing. So. Okay. Yeah.
Now, what about shipping out, getting your product out to customers? How are they finding you? Or do you have like a certain niche you have? Or?
Well, I mean, Little Giant, we're still a brewery in planning, so still underground. Yeah. In a lot of ways. I say that because most of the marketing and the things that I do is to get a beer in people's hands is the most important thing. More than I haven't made any T-shirts yet and handed out free stuff, because the thing that's most important to me is to get beers in people's hands. So what I do is do a lot of special events and fundraisers and things like that, where I know there'll be 60, 80, 100 people, and they'll have my beer and be able to give me feedback and know the brewery and recognize it. Now, once we open, then there's two different things. There's that underground swell of interest in a newer brewery or a good beer, But then, to actually ship it out into the taverns and the retailers and that, then we have that third party. They'll pull up with a refrigerated truck and, load up pallets. It's a lot of pallets.
Yeah.
A lot of pallets of beer. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing too. It's like, you can buy a machine to palletize all your beer, but most of the time we all do it by hand, and a lot of shrink wrap it up real good so it doesn't fall off the truck or fall off the forklift when it's going up into the truck and all that. So yeah, it's a lot
You
of weight.
personally are doing all of logistics. You're not only
Mm-hmm.
creating, you're a chemist, but you're
Mm-hmm.
also uh, determining what kind of volume. You're
Yeah.
packaging it. You're
Mm-hmm.
organizing the in and out shipping of it. It's very interesting.
Sure.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the reasons. Well, that's the main reason I wanted to have you on the show, because you are a small business that is, has a great future ahead of you, and you're
Mm-hmm.
doing all this yourself. Says
Yeah.
a lot about you as a person and company. Um, you
Well,
briefly touched on part.
I'm a masochist and a maniac sometimes. So there you
I guess you have to
go.
be, but you do have to be
Yeah.
that in the logistics world anyway. Um,
Sure.
so you touched on a few, but what are your main challenges that you face?
As far as logistics or as far as the business as a
Logistics
whole?
and as a business.
Logistics are massive. I mean, that really is. When you start talking about getting the beer to market, what's going on with your beer between here and the time that it goes home with somebody from the store or the time that it hits the glass. And that really is, that's the biggest thing outside of, like, I'm building a tasting room right now so that we can have people here to enjoy the beer on premise. And that presents its own problems from a hospitality standpoint and, getting the right people, the knowledgeable beer purveyors. But logistics are huge once you get out in the market because you lose control. I lose control of that. So, right now, like you said, yeah, I'll do everything on my own as much as I can so that I can understand it and know what we need to do as a base moving forward. When we expand, I'll know the nuts and bolts of the distribution and those logistics. But man, once it leaves this place, it's in somebody else's hands. So you have to have a really responsible distributor or whoever is providing the logistics to get that beer to market. It's a lot of trust and then a lot of effort on our part and their part to make sure that the beer is the highest quality that it was when it left the brewery. Heat, age, different things really affect the quality of my product. So to me, to have that stable method of shipping is massive. And then to make sure that those distributors are keeping up with the beer, that, when you go into a 7-Eleven or something like that, that my beer isn't out of date and sitting on a shelf for too
Right.
long, and that happens. It happens to a lot of people. They'll go to maybe a smaller liquor store, 30 miles from their brewery, just pop in there to see, and they see their beer on the shelf and it's 7 months out of date.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no. Things like that. It's like, that's a nightmare. And that's what when I say you kind of lose control, that's it. You can't, you have to have a lot of feet on the ground and a lot of responsible, caring people to make sure that your product is going to be exactly what you want it to be once it leaves this place. And
So how do you find
it's your,
the
it's your logistics. Yeah.
how do you find the people that you can trust to get your product out there?
It's a relationship thing, networking. Fortunately for me, I've been in the industry and I started here in Florida, so a lot of the people who are in the distribution end of things, I have a relationship with, and I'm able to, to sit down, have a beer, and talk about what I see, and what I see the brewery looking like out on the street, or what I would expect from their reps, and working as in a partnership, because it is a partnership. It's kind of a bittersweet partnership because we have to have distributors. So, it's like, it's a legislative thing. So it's like, well, hey buddy, if you weren't around, I'd do it myself and that'd be fine, but you're here, so let's make the best of it. And, there's a lot of good people in the industry and in the distribution side of things. And, I just foster those relationships, and I haven't chosen the distributor yet because we're kind of going with a slow rollout into the public, but that also kind of works to my advantage, I hope, where I could see who's really serious about my product, or is my product just going to get lost in the SKU with all the other microbreweries, or is this somebody who's going to really enjoy a partnership with us and not only make money for the distributorship, but help us grow, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
can you briefly describe the actual supply chain? So, from growing the barley to getting the beer to a customer.
Sure. Let me, I'm going to plan this out here. Okay. So let's say we have three main things to make beer: equipment, ingredients, and then me pretty much. But first of all, equipment. So supply chain on that end for us, I have two small pilot brewing systems that I work on. One came from Colorado, from a small brewery that was upgrading. So I had that shipped from the middle of nowhere, Colorado, to Denver, to Anna Maria, Florida at the time. So the equipment comes from somewhere. We're about to order a 20-barrel brewing system, which is 40 kegs, full-size kegs at a time. We'll be able to brew. That is going to end up coming from a company in Pinellas Park, Florida, which is just over the Sunshine Skyway from us. And there's two reasons that I'm going with them. One, they're doing really good work. And number two, it's 25 minutes over the Skyway. So shipping that whole big rig is going to be a lot easier. Plus, I could check up on the progress of the manufacturing fabrication as we go along. So equipment, got to have your equipment. From there, malted barley, like I was saying earlier, that comes from usually some of you'll have farmers, and then all that barley, two-row barley, goes to a co-op kind of situation and then gets shipped to a maltster somewhere in Wisconsin or, like I said, Idaho, North Dakota, all around that portion of the United States, and then gets bagged and then distributed around the country. So that all the malted barley comes from up north and then ends up in a lot of people use, like, a Brewer Supply Group is one of the distributors of raw materials. So they'll have big warehouses. There's one in Atlanta to serve the Southeast. So they'll go from, let's say, North Dakota from a maltster down to Atlanta, and then that gets distributed through, Florida and the rest of the Southeast. Hop, same kind of situation. You're talking about big old hop fields out there in Oregon and Washington and British Columbia and Idaho. And they go through co-ops. One of the big ones is Hop Union. And then it gets either directly shipped. It's usually a lot easier with hops. Like we could either go through like a Hop Union co-op, or we could contract with individual farmers and have them directly shipped to us. So that's just a matter of volume. And then, if you want to get into contracts for certain hops. Yeast is interesting. I didn't mention yeast. That's what actually makes the beer from a sugary water to the beer itself. Those come from, the yeast cultures come from generally 2 or 3 different laboratories across the United States, mostly on the West Coast. And that's really important because when you order your yeast, talk about a perishable product, that's a live culture. So that's always shipped overnight on a plane to get to your brewery, whether it's like a gallon or 5 gallons worth of yeast culture. It's got to be packed almost ice cold and definitely shipped overnight because the temperature, high temperature, or anything over 90 degrees will kill the yeast off completely. So, yeah, you really want a temperature-controlled environment for that.
Right.
And then once you start talking about bottles, cans, all those things, you're talking about a lot of trucks worth, and that's not a perishable product, so that's just a storage consideration with the packaging, because you have to have a place to keep all your bottles, cans, and kegs. And luckily, you don't have to worry too much about them. They're pretty hardy. You don't want to smash the bottles or the cans. Yeah. So yeah, supply chains all kind of come filtering down this way from around the country, and each one kind of has its own issues involved with it. So yeah.
Excellent. So, Mike, what is the best way people can contact you?
Right now, I'm just like I said, it's kind of low key as far as there's a website which directs you to our blog, which I need to update as always. But Facebook, Twitter, Little Giant Brew on Twitter, Little Giant Brewery on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Periscope. That's fun.
Yeah, that's got to be great. Yeah, I have to check that
Yeah, it's
out.
live. Yeah, live. You get to have some live craziness from the brewery when we have people over. So, yeah, that's the best way to get a hold of me.
All right, great.
Just
Then
Google it.
finally, pardon me?
Nope.
Okay, I'm sorry. Um, Lastly, I ask this question of all my guests. You see logistics everywhere, but
Hmm.
obviously you are a small business and you embody what logistics means. So this is really important. What does logistics
Hmm.
mean to you?
Logistics to me means the efficient distribution of goods through planning and forecasting, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's part of it. You need to know. It's again, when you talk about brewing, you're talking about agriculture. So we don't know what our crop years are going to be from year to year. So we need to know how much we're going to be able to get, when, how's it getting here. Those are huge things. And once you start talking about distribution, logistics are just eminent. I mean, that's just massive because you need to know who, how, and what kind of quality transportation will people provide for your product once it leaves here. So, yeah, a lot of planning, a lot of forecasting, and always being ready for something to go wrong.
Great. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, troubleshooting, problem solving. Yeah, it's logistics. So,
Yeah. Everything.
yeah.
Everything. Well, Michael, I'd like to thank you for joining us once again. This is Michael Wagner, owner, purveyor
Little
of
Giant Brewery.
Little Giant Brewery. Again, how do they contact you? Basically, best way to contact you is on social media.
Yeah, yeah. So you can Google us or come visit. We're at 301 7th Street East in Bradenton. You
All
can
right.
see the work in progress. That is the Little Giant Brewery.
Yeah, it's the Gulf Coast of Florida, man. That's one of my favorite
Yeah.
spots in the world. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Good
come
place.
on and go visit them. Well, once again, Michael, thanks for joining us, and good luck.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Bye. And we'll see you next time on Logical Logistics.
Click the subscribe button for new videos every week and download us and review us on iTunes. Visit www.beslogistics.net for more logistics, transportation, and warehousing resources. Thanks for watching.